green light for Hinkley Point C nuclear power station in the next 24 hours. Mrs May's initial delay caused consternation, but she's now ready to give the French and the Chinese the go-ahead with the backing of the unions.
The government is working flat out on the Hinkley deal. They wanted to announce it on Monday, but there are still some last-minute concerns. We'll have the latest.
Also this lunchtime, MPs savage Cameron over Libya. Gaddafi was toppled, but they say a lack of strategy helped the rise of so-called Islamic State. Russia accused of hacking the drug test results of America's top athletes, including Biles and the Williams sisters. And few water, wet one. Manchester flooded as the rest of the nation basked in sunshine and record-breaking temperatures.
This is ITV News with Alistair Stewart.
Good afternoon. Theresa May says she likes to consider the facts before making big decisions. Well, they don't get much bigger than the £18 billion joint investment with the French and the Chinese in the next generation of British nuclear power stations. But within the next 24 hours, ITV News understands she will give the controversial Hinkley Point C power station project the go-ahead. The Prime Minister was poised to give the green light on Monday, but the Energy Minister had some last-minute concerns. The GMB union, however, has backed her, saying the huge project will yield 25,000 quality jobs. Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, has the details.
We were promised a decision in September, and now one is imminent. And when it comes, it seems the preparation works here at the huge site in Somerset will not have been in vain. The government is on the verge of giving Hinkley Point the go-ahead, but not without some last-minute hiccups throughout the week.
It's very difficult for the government. They have put £18 billion worth of investment at risk. They've put 25,000 highly skilled jobs at risk by putting this on hold. And now they're in a position of saying, well, actually, we think it's OK and it should just go ahead.
But they can't do nothing. They have to look like there are some
exactly
changes.
The point.
Money for the £18 billion plant is coming from the French energy giant EDF and also from the Chinese. Theresa May put the project on ice in July because she wanted to re-examine China's access to our nuclear infrastructure. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister was ready to tell the French President the deal was finally back on. A phone call was arranged with François Hollande on Monday, but Mrs May had to cancel it when her Energy Secretary announced he still had some 11th hour concerns. Members of the Cabinet remain tight-lipped about the imminent decision.
Well, there are a huge number of factors to consider when looking at the Hinkley Point project. They've been well rehearsed about the cost, about security, but also about the need to keep the lights on.
China will be watching all of this very closely. The Prime Minister met President Xi last week. If China is given permission to help build the new reactor at Hinkley Point, Chinese money will continue to flow into the UK. It would be a very different story if this project was axed. Now, no one here is pretending that this is an easy decision. There is lots at stake, not just the jobs at Hinkley Point, the supply chain, the apprenticeships, and then there's that not small matter of £18 billion of foreign investment from France and from China. Now, after the government put this on ice so dramatically back in July, they can't do nothing. They can't come back here this week and say they've got the same deal. They will make some changes, perhaps on the price of the electricity that they're going to pay the operators of Hinkley Point, perhaps also on this issue of security of supply and Chinese access to our nuclear infrastructure. But the Chinese have got a lot riding on this. They're not going to want too many changes. Theresa May has a lot riding on this too.
Chris, thank you. The former Prime Minister has been accused of ill-conceived interventions in Libya which lacked any coherent strategy. In 2011, it appeared a glory moment, with Libyans cheering Mr Cameron to the rafters. MPs from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, however, say he took Britain to war against Libya's Colonel Gaddafi on erroneous assumptions, and that intervention caused chaos in the country and gave a boost to so-called Islamic State. Martha Fairley has the details.
erroneous assumptions informed by incomplete intelligence and an incomplete understanding of the rebellion in Libya. It's 5 years since British planes launched airstrikes against Colonel Gaddafi's forces when the Libyan dictator's regime threatened to attack the rebel-held city of Benghazi. But a scathing parliamentary report says by the summer of 2011, the mission of the international coalition, led by Britain and France, had drifted from the protection of civilians to an opportunist policy of regime change. And it's criticised former Prime Minister David Cameron for failing to put a strategy in place to support Libya once Gaddafi was overthrown.
We were being driven along by a French agenda, which we then signed up to, and it then became very much a personal initiative of both the Prime Minister and President Sarkozy for this to continue without a pause, without reassessment, as the mission moved from protecting the people of Benghazi into changing the regime in Libya. And clearly, some people around that table thought there should be a reassessment during the course of that process as to whether that was the right thing to do.
The report says other political options could have been investigated, including exploiting Tony Blair's contacts with Colonel Gaddafi. But with no coherent strategy, rival militias and the so-called Islamic State took hold. And the committee says David Cameron was ultimately responsible. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
And our international affairs editor, Raghi Omar, joins me live. Pretty savage stuff there, but will it have a long-term impact on Britain's future strategy for intervention?
Well, it depends who the next government is, because in some ways you could sum this up as this report as being sort of Chilcott's junior brother, because there are almost exactly the same lessons there to be learned. You know, if you're going to get rid of a dictator in the Middle East, you will create a vacuum. There's nothing Al-Qaeda and extremist groups like ISIS like better than a vacuum. The intelligence was overstated on the humanitarian cause for intervention. There was no planning afterwards. Everything was left to the sense of hindsight. So it's saying that exactly the same lessons that should have been learnt in Iraq were not. I suppose in some ways, I go back to what President Obama said a few months ago about this whole intervention led by France and Britain. He called it, using an American colloquialism, a spectacle of excrement.
Nicely put. Raghi, thank you. Here, a British man accused of attempting to shoot Donald Trump at a Las Vegas rally in June has pleaded guilty in the United States. 20-year-old Michael Sanford, who has autism, admits trying to grab a policeman's gun at the rally. His family had travelled to Nevada to persuade him to sign a plea agreement in the hope of getting a reduced sentence. And police in Derbyshire have warned the public to stay alert after a convicted murderer escaped from an open prison. Darren Jackson is on the run after finding his way out of Her Majesty's Prison Sudbury yesterday morning. The 51-year-old was sentenced to life behind bars 30 years ago. An armed robber has been found guilty of the manslaughter of a father of four who was shot during a raid on his warehouse. Suraj Mistry was acquitted of murdering Akhtar Javid, and police are still searching for the gunman they suspect fired the fatal shots. Ben Chapman has the latest from the court.
At home and at work, Akhtar Javid was loved as a kind and caring family man and a respected businessman. But when two men carrying guns walked into his warehouse last February, they stole the future he'd worked so hard to build.
One of the things that I used to pray for all the time is to hope that I can see my mum and dad grow old together. All the dreams that they had, they've just been shattered now.
Her father was betrayed by a former colleague, Sander van Alten. Police found a map of the warehouse he'd drawn for the gunman on the back of a water bill. They also knew Mr. Javid was the only person with access to the safe, so after forcing staff into an office, they lead him at gunpoint into the lobby, demanding he open it. We've frozen the CCTV as the gunman shoots him in the foot and then in the leg for refusing. Akhtar Javid is unarmed, bound and badly wounded. But in a desperate attempt to escape, he lunges at the gunman, who in the struggle shoots him again, first in the mouth and then in the throat. Police suspect the masked killer that night was Tahir Zarif, but he wasn't in court because days later he fled with his mother to Pakistan and remains the subject of an international manhunt.
We believe he's the person that pulled the trigger that killed Akhtar Javid. His family cannot begin to get closure until this man is brought back to the United Kingdom and faces trial.
His accomplice, Siraj Mistry, has now been convicted of manslaughter. The getaway driver, Lamar Wally, guilty of conspiracy to rob for their part in a raid that went appallingly wrong. After shooting the only person who could get them the money, the gang fled empty-handed, but robbed a family of someone priceless. When the robbers are sentenced later this month, though, there will again be a conspicuous absence. The man suspected of actually pulling the trigger and killing Akhtar Javid. Now, there is no extradition treaty with Pakistan, but the police say they're working closely with the authorities there and are confident they can bring their suspect Tahir Zarif back. The family say there can be no closure for them until he too is sitting here in the dock.
Ben, thank you. Still to come this lunchtime, the species under threat in the UK. And the hottest September day for 100 years for most, but winter firmly arrived in Manchester. But first, the Labour leader grilled the Prime Minister this lunchtime on her plans for more grammar schools in England. At Prime Minister's questions, Jeremy Corbyn expressed his anger at the policy, claiming it had no support from educational experts or her predecessor, David Cameron. Theresa May insisted she just wants more good school places. Well, our political correspondent Carl Dinnin joins us live from Westminster now. Quite a tiff.
Yeah, it was, and Jeremy Corbyn seemed to get the best of the Prime Minister today, which is not something one hears oneself saying very often. He did it in the beginning by quoting David Cameron at her.
There is a kind of hopelessness about the demand to bring back grammars. Not my words, those of the former Right Honourable Member for Witney. Isn't he correct that what we need is investment in all of our schools, a good school for every child, not this selection at the age of 11.
What we need is a good school for every child, and that's precisely what we will be delivering with the policy that we've announced.
Now, the government's argument on this is that they're not going back to the old-style grammar system. There will be better schools for those who don't go to grammar schools. But this is fertile territory for Jeremy Corbyn because his party is more united against grammar schools than the Conservative Party are united in favour of them. And we'll hear him coming back to this one, I think.
Carl, thank you. The confidential medical data of some of America's top athletes has been accessed allegedly by a Russian cyber espionage group. A website containing information about athletes including Venus and Serena Williams was hacked by a group known as Fancy Bear. The World Anti-Doping Agency has condemned the cyber attack. Our sports editor Steve Scott is here with me live. Are these athletes actually accused of doing anything illegal?
No, they're not doing anything wrong at all, Alistair. Yes, they've been taking banned substances, but for medical reasons, which they are allowed to do. Put it like this, I'm a cyclist, I've got asthma, and the traditional remedy includes a banned substance. Well, I apply to the authority to say, can I use it? And they either say yes or no. If they say yes, then I can. In the case of the Williams sisters, it's been pain-killing drugs and anti-inflammatory medication. And in the case of Simone Biles, it was a drug she was taking for ADHD. Now, she tweeted last night, having ADHD and taking medicine for it is nothing to be ashamed of, nothing that I'm afraid to let people know. So to go back to your question, yes, they've been taking banned substances, but none of it wrong.
But interestingly, that quote rather that you gave us there from Simone informs my next question. Yeah. Is there an implication for this data being out in the public domain?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for a start, there's the question of the integrity of the World Anti-Doping systems. I mean, how can athletes trust it if they know that people are managing to get in and get their personal information? And if they can get in, who's to say they can't be changing some of those details? Then there's security, of course. That's a big issue. This system monitors the whereabouts of athletes on a daily basis. That's not information they want to come out into the public domain. And it also throws up the question of these, what are called therapeutic use exemptions, to be allowed to use banned substances, but legally. I suspect with more details coming out from these hackers, as they've promised to do, that is something the authorities say the system that allows that is robust, but it's something that I think will be challenged in the weeks and months ahead.
Steve, thanks very much. Now, in the last few minutes, Paralympics GB has surpassed its gold medal total from London 2012. The The cyclist Dame Sarah Storey has just won her road time trial, her 13th first place at the Paralympics. And that has pushed Britain to a total of 35 golds and 76 medals in total. Suzanne Verdi on the action this lunchtime and, of course, last night.
A lucky number for Sarah Storey. Britain's most successful Paralympian wins her 13th gold medal in road cycling. It's been golden glory all the way.
He's done it! What a performance!
Delighted is probably an understatement to describe the moment when Rob Davis realised he'd won gold in the men's singles Class 1 table tennis. The Welshman, who plays with a table tennis bat strapped to his hand, beat Korean Young Dae-ju 3-1 to clinch victory. Joining him with gold medals on the track were Libby Clegg, winning the T11 200 metres, and Georgina Hermitage, who won the T37 400 metres title. Holly Arnold clinched gold in the F46 javelin with a world record throw. In the pool, there was more golden glory thanks to Stephanie Millwood and Matt Wiley. This afternoon, the wheelchair rugby begins. One of those who'll be competing is former serviceman Ryan Cowling. His daughter's very proud of him.
And I'm very, very proud of him because it's a big thing to get into the Paralympics.
It's been a super 6 days for Team GB at the Paralympics, and there are still 5 days to go. Suzanne Verdi, ITV News.
And Richard Pallow joins us live from Rio. Remarkable stuff this lunchtime from Sarah Storey.
Well, when talking about Dame Sarah Storey, you kind of run out of superlatives, don't you? That 13th gold achieved at a time when cycling and Paralympic sport has never been stronger. And you look at the struggles so far that someone like David Weir, the wheelchair racer, has had at the age of 37. And there it is, Storey, at a year older, is still absolutely dominating her field. And don't forget, she's got another potential gold to come on the weekend in the road race, although that is something that is slightly more unpredictable. And to beat London's gold tally on the morning of day 7, the whole team, is a really remarkable achievement. We've still got best part of 5 days of competition to go. Plenty more chances today. I suspect the highlight could be Hannah Cockcroft, also a wheelchair racer, back in action in the 400.
Richard, thanks. Yeah, the first post-Brexit employment figures show that the number of people out of work has fallen by almost 40,000 to 1.63 million. The figures taken in the 3 months to the end of July also show wages have risen by more than 2% in the last year. Intensive farming is being blamed for an overwhelmingly negative impact on wildlife in the UK. More than 50 different wildlife organisations were involved in the State of Nature report, which found that over 1,000 farmland species are now at risk of extinction. That is up from 755 species that were at risk just a few years ago. Some of the species under threat, the Kentish snake millipede, which typically measures between just 8 and 15 millimetres in length, the mole cricket, which burrows underground and eats the roots of freshly planted vegetables, and the wonderful necklace ground beetle, named after the pattern on its wing that resembles a beaded necklace. Hedgehogs have already suffered a population decline, and Damon Green has more from one sanctuary in Withington.
Well, these are just a few of the patients here at the Withington Hedgehog Hospital in Manchester. It's been going for 3 decades. At its peak, there would be 600 hedgehogs being cared for in this little house on the edge of Manchester, but now there are just 200. Now, Barbara is the person in charge here. She's been looking after hedgehogs for 30 years. Why has the hedgehog declined so much in that time, would you say?
Because we're taking their habitat away, plus the pesticides that we get in the garden for to make our lawns okay. And
what's happened to this little fellow you're holding?
He's been caught in some wire netting and chopped his neck off. The maggots had come in because he got poorly then. While he couldn't get out, they assumed that he died, so they'd laid their eggs on him, and then they hatch once they get warm.
So when you first moved here 30 years ago, there were hedgehogs everywhere, is that the case?
In my garden was absolutely full of hedgehogs. You'd sit out at night and you'd hear them, and now we don't hear any of the hedgehogs at all.
Well, the State of Nature report issued today suggests that 50% of animals in this country have suffered a serious decline in their numbers in the last few years, and 15%, 1 in 7, is in danger of extinction. If habitat loss isn't reversed in the next few years, we could lose the British hedgehog forever.
And more on why some species like the hedgehog are in decline on our website, itv.com/news. Finally, it was officially the hottest September day in over 100 years yesterday, with temperatures soaring to over 35.4 degrees in some parts of the country. In other parts, though, you might be forgiven for thinking that we were smack bang in the middle of winter. While the south basked, it was a different story. Up north, Livia Kinsley explains.
That's how to make an arrival. Goodbye summer, storms come on in. Oh, how we haven't missed streets underwater. This one filmed in Manchester by a man enjoying a night at the pub. At least someone found a way to get home. If you want a free shower, the city's your oyster. Try the Trafford Shopping Centre car park. Or just pop into Harvey Nichols, where it's been pouring through the roof. You may get a few shocked floor staff watching on. When the rain rolls in, it often brings disaster for trains.
No one would believe it.
These passengers were forced to abandon their carriages, climbing onto the tracks. Abandonment too at Manchester City Football Club, postponing their first game in the Champions League as the pitch turned into a pool. Over the stadium, the skies put on a consolatory show. And all this while in the south, people are still basking in the sweet taste of September sun. It's a tale of two summers. One still going, the other most certainly not. Olivia Kinsley, ITV News.
Breaking news, Pauline Kafficki has been found not guilty of misconduct. More charges to be considered. The full results on the ITV Evening News at 6:30. But from all of us on the Lunchtime News, bye-bye.